The fuel line had ruptured sometime in the third watch, which meant by the time my shift started at 06, airlock bay 4 smelled like the inside of a Terran combustion engine, and there was a slick on the deck plating thick enough to skate on. I had a mop. I had a bucket. I had a degreaser concentrate that the Vethaal maintenance contractor had left on the shelf 2 years ago, and which I suspected had never been opened, because the Vethaal do not mop floors themselves. That is what the humans on Vethaal Station are for. I want to be clear that I am not bitter about that. I have known since I was 22 years old that most of my working life would be spent in places other people did not want to be. I spent 18 years doing deep pressure hull work in the Terran North Sea service, going down to 40, 50, 60 meters in water cold enough to stop a heart, trailing a signal line, doing work with my hands that the automated rigs could not manage because the automated rigs did not have hands that could feel what mine could feel. You learn things about yourself in water that dark. You learn that calm is a skill. You learn that panic is a choice and a bad one. You learn to read what you cannot see. You learn that the water does not know you are there and does not care whether you come back up, and that this is not a threat. It is a condition, the way weather is a condition, the way depth is a condition. You work inside it the way you work inside any condition, carefully, without fuss, paying attention. When the North Sea work dried up, when I got to 47, and my left knee said it had done enough descents, and I had to agree with it, I took a station posting. Vethaal was hiring. The pay was standard, and the posting was out on the colonial fringe of Vethaal space, which put it firmly in the category of places most Terran workers didn't want, which in my experience is precisely where the interesting work is. I'd been docking supervisor for 11 years by the time the crisis call came in. I'd heard it over the bay comm. I was not supposed to hear it. The crisis channel runs on the fleet coordination band, not the station maintenance band, but Bay 4's comm relay shares a junction box with the upper operations deck, and the junction box had a grounding fault I'd been filing repair requests about for 2 years. 2 years. 7 separate requests. The maintenance contractor's standard response was that it was a low-priority issue and it was on the schedule. I had stopped being frustrated about it and started treating it as an informational asset, which is how I would recommend dealing with most bureaucratic obstruction, not with resentment but with adaptation. The grounding fault meant that when the fleet commander's board lit up on the level above me, the audio bled through my bay speaker at about a quarter volume, low and scratchy, but audible if you were in a quiet room. Bay 4 was quiet. Just me and the mop and the fuel line smell and the crack and hiss of the degreaser on the deck plating. So I heard Fleet Commander Arath's voice, and I heard the duty officer's voice, and then I heard enough of the situation to understand what was happening. The Vethaal Imperial Research Vessel Sareth Ven, a mid-weight scientific platform, deep atmosphere survey grade, had gone into the Veil 4 days ago on a standard chromatic layer mapping run. The Veil is what the Vethaal call the storm system that wraps the gas giant Vethaal primary below our station. In Vethaal, the word means something between well and depth. The older colonists call it the purple well because of the color the ammonia bands take on when the storm rotates, and the light catches the upper layer just right. This deep bruised violet that you can see from the station windows when the viewing shields are up. It is beautiful, and it will kill you without effort or interest. Ships have been going into the Veil for 300 years, and a significant number of them have not come back. There are names for those ships on a memorial plaque in the station's administrative corridor, which I walk past every morning on my way to Bay 4. I have read them. I read them the first week I arrived, and I read them occasionally since, because I think it is worth knowing what a place has taken. It does not make the work safer. It makes it honest. The Sareth Ven had been on a standard run. Standard runs do not go below the 3rd atmospheric layer, which sits at a depth where active scanners work and tether retrieval is routine. The Sareth Ven's pilot, according to the duty officer's clipped, careful account, had misjudged the storm rotation and been pulled into the fourth layer. The fourth layer is where the Vethal's magnetic interference field is dense enough to scramble active scanner arrays. It is also where the pressure differential creates what the Vethaal engineers call chromatic shear, turbulence that moves in directions that Vethaal fluid dynamics models have been trying to predict accurately for 60 years, and which Vethaal fluid dynamics models have not yet managed to predict accurately for 60 years. The shear does not cooperate with models because the storm's interior rotation is not regular. It has a periodicity, yes, a rhythm that averages out to around 90 to 110 minutes per cycle, but the individual cycles vary, and the variance is not random noise. It is structured in a way that the Vethaal's published models treat as noise because they do not have enough data from inside the fourth layer to distinguish it from noise. I know this because I have spent 9 years collecting data from the edge of the fourth layer on Bay 4's maintenance atmospheric array, which was designed to monitor weather conditions in the station's immediate vicinity, and which I had quietly expanded to log fourth layer readings, because the fourth layer readings were there to log, and I was curious about them. And curiosity, in my experience, is the cheapest form of productivity. 4 Vethaal recovery ships had gone to the boundary of the fourth layer. 2 had attempted active scan sweeps. The interference had blinded them both within the first 20 minutes. The 3rd recovery ship had deployed a tether probe package, a standard Vethaal automated retrieval system, which uses an active transponder to locate the target vessel and then runs a magnetic grapple on an auto winch. And the interference had severed the transponder signal within 30 seconds. The 4th recovery ship had pulled back when its navigation array began producing anomalous readings, and the captain had made the correct professional decision that losing a 4th ship was not going to help anyone. I heard all of this while I mopped. What I heard next was the detail that made me stop mopping. The duty officer said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be neutral, "Fleet Commander, the manifest for the Sarath Ven's current mission rotation includes Princess Verath's zone. The Emperor's office has been notified. The recovery window before the vessel's power reserves become critical is estimated at 16 hours. There was a pause on the channel, a long one. The kind of pause that happens when the person receiving information already knows the information and is deciding what to do with the fact that someone else has now said it out loud. Then Fleet Commander Arath said, "Continue standard recovery protocol. Requisition 2 additional tether probe packages from the depot. Brief the recovery captains on the power reserve timeline." The channel went quiet. I stood there with the mop in my hands for what was probably 30 seconds. I was looking at the degreaser on the deck. The degreaser was doing its job, the slick breaking down at the edges, the dark translucent film losing its coherence and becoming something that would eventually mop up. My mind was running through a separate problem, the way it does when a piece of information arrives and lodges in the place where the work problems live, the place that doesn't wait for permission to start thinking. Then I leaned the mop against the wall, walked to the bay's comm panel, and called the operations deck. The duty officer who answered was a young Vethaal male named Set Vayorn. I knew Set. He was 26 years old and very efficient and very courteous, and he treated me the way most of the Vethaal operations staff treated me, which was with a kind of polite opacity, acknowledging my presence without quite being able to categorize it. I was the human woman who ran docking Bay 4 and knew where the spare relay parts were, and had a tendency to file maintenance reports with more precision than the administration found comfortable. That was the frame he had for me. It was not wrong. It was just incomplete. "Supervisor Solis," he said, "how can I help you?" "The Sarath Ven," I said. "What depth did it settle to before the signal dropped?" There was a pause. "I'm not sure that information is." "I'm not asking you to give me classified fleet data," I said. I'm asking you what depth the vessel was at when your active scanners lost it. That's a physical datum. It's not strategic. It has no operational sensitivity. I would like to know it. Another pause. Then, carefully. Our last confirmed position put it at approximately 4,100 meters into the fourth layer. The storm floor at that depth is, the pressure and interference conditions are not consistent with active sensor retrieval. I know what they're consistent with, I said. Thank you, Set. I hung up. I went to my equipment locker at the back of Bay 4 and stood in front of it for a moment. The locker is 3 meters tall, and I keep it organized the way I kept my dive bag organized in the North Sea service. Everything in its place, everything inspectable in 30 seconds, nothing in it that isn't useful and nothing useful that isn't in it. I knew what was on each shelf. I had checked it 2 weeks ago on the regular monthly inspection I do on all my equipment. A habit left over from 18 years of work where equipment condition was the difference between a normal day and the last day of your life. Third shelf from the left. Spare relay parts on the right side, thermal flask on the lower left, and in the center, in the gray canvas case I had made for it at age 43 when the standard issue case wore out, the handrail. I also knew something that I suspected the Vethaal fleet recovery specialists did not know, because it was a piece of knowledge that came from a type of work that the Vethaal do not do and have never done. The Vethaal are not divers. They do not go into depths by hand. They build machines to go into depths for them, and those machines are very good. And when those machines fail in an interference environment, they do not have a fallback because the fallback is a person with a reel and a float and 50 meters of monofilament, and that person is not part of Vethaal standard recovery protocol. The Terran deepwater passive listen float is not complicated. It is a weighted object dense enough to sink, buoyant enough to stabilize at depth with a contact resonance receiver built into its base. It does not emit a signal. It does not use active scanning. It listens. Specifically, it listens for the low-frequency resonance that a pressurized hull under stress emits, a specific frequency band, around 60 to 80 cycles per second in Terran water conditions, that a compromised vessel sends through the medium around it like a very slow, very quiet bell. You can hear a large pressurized hull in open water at a kilometer or more if conditions are right. The signal propagates through the medium, not through air, not through electromagnetic space, through the medium itself mechanically, the way sound propagates through a solid or a liquid or, yes, a dense atmosphere. In a gas giant atmosphere, denser medium, different propagation characteristics. The math changes, but the principle does not. Passive resonance does not care about electromagnetic interference. It is mechanical. It is physics. It does not need a transponder. I had used a passive listen float in the North Sea service so many times that I had eventually built my own, because the standard issue Terran service model was heavy and awkward to spool, and I had a bad left wrist from a depth incident at age 39. A moment of carelessness in heavy current that I had made into a permanent reminder not to be careless, which is the way the body keeps records of things the mind would rather forget. My rig used 50 meters of monofilament, rated for 200 kilograms of load, on a hand-cranked reel with a tension indicator made from a dial gauge I'd cannibalized from a scrapped pressure meter. The float was a dense synthetic core wrapped in a contact resonance film I'd sourced from a Terran acoustic engineering catalog. It was not elegant. It was not impressive to look at. It had kept 14 people alive over the course of my career, by locating their position when their emergency transponders failed, their signal lines kinked, their active locators went dark in surge or current or mechanical failure. It had found them not by calling out and waiting for a reply, but by listening for the sound they were already making, the sound any pressurized hull or sealed suit makes when it is under stress, the low, slow bell of something that is still intact but not for long. I took it out of the canvas case. I ran my hands over the reel housing. I checked the spool by pulling 3 meters of line through my fingers. The monofilament was sound, no kinks, no abrasion, no brittleness. I checked the float by pressing my thumb against the resonance film and feeling for delamination or cracking. Nothing. 11 years in a locker on a transit station above a gas giant, and it was in the same condition it had been when I last used it on the North Sea floor at 43, pulling a diver out of a current pocket at 52 meters while his rebreather ran down. That diver's name was Paul Wares. He has 2 grandchildren now, I understand, which is information I received in a message 8 years ago that I have kept in my personal files. I went upstairs to see the station governor. Governor Vethos Riln was not happy to see me. That was not unusual. Governor Riln was a careful man, a career administrator who had been running Vethaal Station for 14 years, and who operated on the principle that situations being handled by the appropriate authority should not be interfered with by people whose formal role was to oversee docking bay operations. He had a way of arranging his expression when I appeared in his office that suggested he was about to manage something that was not quite a problem and not quite not a problem, and that the management of it would require more patience than it appeared to warrant. He had that expression when I came in. "Supervisor Solis," he said, from behind his desk on the administrative level, with the polite firmness of a man who has managed difficult personnel before. "The recovery operation is under Fleet Commander Arath's direct supervision. The appropriate recovery assets are being deployed. I understand that you have concerns, but this is not a situation in which civilian station staff can contribute meaningfully, and I would ask you to return to your duties." I put the handreel on his desk. He looked at it. It is not an impressive object. It looks like a large fishing reel, which is more or less what it is, if a fishing reel were built by someone who cared more about tension calibration than about appearance. "Governor," I said, 4 active scan recovery ships have tried the 4th layer. The interference field has blinded 2 of them and cut the transponder signal on the 3rd. Your fleet commander is about to send 2 more tether probe packages into the same conditions that severed the last one. In 16 hours, the Sareth Ven's power reserves will be critical. In 18 hours, if the reserves are not replenished, the environmental management systems will begin load shedding. At that point, the crew and any passengers are in serious difficulty regardless of hull integrity. "I am aware of the situation," he said. "The vessel is at 4,100 meters in the 4th layer. The storm floor at that depth runs chromatic shear in a rotational pattern with a periodicity of approximately 90 to 110 minutes per cycle. I have 9 years of upper Vethaal observation data from Bay 4's atmospheric monitoring array, which I have been logging as a station asset because the fleet's instruments only cover the 3rd layer, and I started logging the 4th layer on my own time because the 4th layer's data was there to log, and I thought it was worth having." I paused. I had not planned to deliver all of that in one sequence. I have propagation models for the 4th layer's medium characteristics. I can use them. Governor Riln looked at the reel. He looked at me. He had the expression of a man confronting a category he did not have a box for, and was not sure he wanted to acquire one. "You have models of the 4th layer," he said. "Yes." "Based on 9 years of maintenance array data?" "Yes." "That you collected on your own time?" "On shift mostly," I said. "The array logs automatically. I built the data architecture and ran the analysis in the evenings." That last part was the kind of detail that tended to make administrators uncomfortable, and I could see it land the way I expected it to land, which was as something between impressive and unsettling, but I did not have time to manage his comfort. "The vessel," I said, "is pressurized and intact, or it is not. If it is not, there is nothing to retrieve. If it is emitting a low-frequency resonance signature through the medium around it that an active scanner cannot detect because the active scanner uses the electromagnetic band that the interference blocks. A passive resonance receiver does not use that band. It uses the mechanical propagation band. Pressure, not signal. The interference field does not affect it. I can lower a float from the cargo arm platform on Bay 4's outer dock and listen for the vessel's position if you give me authorization to use the arm. There was a long silence. "You have used this device before," he said finally. 142 times, I said. I located a hull successfully on 140 times. I did not locate a hull on 2 occasions. In both cases, the hull had failed before I deployed the float. In no case was the failure attributable to the equipment or the method. He was very quiet. He was looking at the reel. I could see him working through something, not the technical question, which I do not think he had the background to evaluate, but the administrative question, which was, what happens if I authorize this and it fails, and what happens if I do not authorize this and someone asks me why not? "If I give you this authorization," he said at last, "and the recovery fails, I want it understood that this was an unsanctioned attempt by a station employee and not an official recovery operation." I had expected something like that. "That's fine," I said. "And if it succeeds," he said. "Then the fleet commander's tether operation succeeded," I said, "and I'll write up my equipment as a contributing methodology in the technical notes. Nothing more." He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he said, "Authorization granted, Bay 4 cargo arm platform, 1 hour." I went back downstairs. I spent the hour doing what I would have done before any deep pressure descent in the North Sea service, checking my equipment, running the reel by hand to confirm the spool tension, testing the gauge, inspecting the float's contact resonance film section by section under the bay's inspection lamp. The film was intact. 11 years on a shelf had not degraded it in any way I could detect, which did not surprise me because I had stored it correctly, sealed, dry in the canvas case, away from UV and chemical exposure, which are the 3 things that kill contact resonance film and which are the 3 things the locker protected against. Good storage is a form of optimism. You store something carefully because you believe you might need it later, and that belief, over 11 years, turns out to be worth the space it takes. I also pulled my atmospheric log files. 9 years of 4th layer observation data, organized by date and depth band and storm rotation phase. I had not looked at the full archive in about a year. I look at the recent data regularly, but the full 9-year record I had not needed to access since I finished building the propagation model 4 years ago. The model used the full archive as its training set. I called it up now and ran a current conditions update, feeding in the morning's atmospheric readings from the maintenance array, and it returned a storm rotation estimate that put the next low shear window at approximately 40 minutes out, with a window duration of 12 to 15 minutes. The following window would be 90 to 100 minutes after that. Low shear windows are the periods between storm rotation peaks when the chromatic shear in the 4th layer drops to its minimum. The shear is never 0. The veil does not have a quiet setting, but in the low shear window it drops enough that a monofilament in the medium can transmit a clean signal without the turbulence noise overwhelming the resonance frequency I was listening for. Think of it as the difference between trying to hear someone speak in a quiet room and trying to hear them speak in the middle of a machinery bay. In the shear peak phase, the line noise would swamp everything. In the low shear window, I might hear something. I was working on might. That is not unusual in this kind of work. I also calculated the propagation depth I would need. The float at the standard 50-meter deployment depth would be in the veil's upper fringe above the 3rd layer boundary, in a region where the medium was thinner and the signal propagation was weaker. I needed to get it deeper. I had spliced an additional 5 meters of monofilament to the spool before leaving the locker, but I thought I might need more. I checked the bay stores. I had another 30 meters of compatible monofilament in the maintenance supplies, the same type and rating, used for instrumentation tether work. I spliced it in. 85 meters total. That would put the float below the third layer boundary into the upper fourth layer if the arm could reach it. The cargo arm's rated extension was 50 meters, but in a vertical deployment I could go deeper by letting the float's weighted descent take it below the arm tip. The monofilament's rated load would handle the float's weight at that extension with substantial margin. I ate before I went to the platform. This is a rule I have kept since the North Sea service. You do not go into depth work without eating. Your judgment deteriorates with your blood sugar faster than you think it does, and depth work requires judgment. I had a grain roll and 2 hard-boiled eggs from my lunch kit and the rest of the thermal flask, which was still warm enough to call coffee. Then I picked up the reel and went to the cargo arm platform. Bay 4's cargo arm platform is an external structure. It extends out over the station's lower hull, above the atmospheric boundary, where the veil's upper layer begins to thicken. The platform is designed for loading and unloading heavy freight from vessels docked at the lower cradles, and it has its own environmental seal, which means I could work out there with the bay's atmospheric management keeping the pressure and temperature manageable, while the platform itself extended into the veil's upper fringe. The arm itself is 50 meters of articulated carbon composite with a 200-kilogram load rating and a magnetic lock cargo hook at its tip. I had used it thousands of times for cargo operations. I knew its quirks, the slight hesitation in the third joint articulation that the maintenance notes called within spec, and which I called a prelude to a replacement need. The tendency of the load sensor to read slightly high in cold atmospheric conditions. The way the arm vibrated at certain extension lengths in high wind conditions, which on Vethaal station was more frequent than the design specification had apparently anticipated. I knew all of that, and knowing it meant I knew what the arm's behavior during the deployment would tell me and what it would not. I locked the reel to the cargo hook's mounting bracket with a clamp I had fabricated 11 years ago, because I had always thought that if I ever needed to use this equipment on a gas giant, I would need to lock it to something solid, and the cargo hook was the most solid thing on the platform. The clamp was solid steel, hand-machined, and had been in my locker for 11 years alongside the reel. I had made them for each other. The fit was clean. I set the arm extension to 40 meters and ran a load test. The arm held without complaint. Then I calculated the deployment angle. I wanted the float dropping at close to vertical below the arm tip, using the monofilament's rated load to allow deep extension below the arm's mechanical reach. I adjusted the arm to a downward angle of about 60 degrees from horizontal, which would let the float's weight pull it down and in, toward the veil's fourth layer boundary. That geometry, combined with the monofilament length, put my estimated float depth at somewhere between 70 and 90 meters below the arm tip, into the upper fourth layer, where the medium density was high enough for good signal propagation. Then I waited for the window. The veil from the cargo arm platform is not something I can describe accurately. The upper edge of the fourth layer, from 100 meters above it, is a color that does not have a good English name and does not have a good Vethaal name either, though the Vethaal have tried harder to name it. The closest they have come is veil tone, which means the color of the depth, which is not a description so much as an admission that the thing being described resists description. It is purple the way deep water is blue, not the color of an object you can hold but the color of a condition, the color of pressure and distance, and the particular quality of light that exists where there is no ordinary light to give objects their ordinary colors. It moves. The storm rotates in slow, massive cycles, and the bands of ammonia and methane and heavier compounds shift against each other, and the chromatic interference that blinds every scanner in the Vethaal fleet is visible to the naked eye as a shimmer across the surface, a visual distortion like heat haze but heavier, weighted, the visual impression of something that has mass. I have worked in water that produced a feeling like that. Not the color, the feeling of scale. The feeling of being on the surface of something that is very large and very indifferent, and that will continue being very large and very indifferent long after you have finished whatever you are doing on its surface. In the North Sea, at 50 meters, you feel the same thing. You feel it with your whole body rather than just your eyes, because at 50 meters the pressure is present in everything. In your suit, in your breathing, in the faint compression of your eardrums that never fully goes away even with good equalization. It is not a threatening feeling, exactly. It is a clarifying one. It removes everything that is not immediately relevant. The timer hit 0. I lowered the float. Hand cranking 85 meters of monofilament over the side of a cargo arm platform in a station maintenance suit is not glamorous work. The reel is weighted enough that the hand crank requires genuine effort, and the left wrist, which has its own opinions about effort, registered them. The line played out clean, no kinks, the float descending at the angle I'd calculated, the tension indicator reading the weight of the float plus the line drag in the medium. When the indicator needle settled at the float's operating depth, I locked the crank. I watched the timer. I had approximately 12 minutes. And then I listened. Not with my ears. The float's resonance signal comes up the monofilament as a physical vibration, a very faint, very specific tremor in the line that I can feel through the reel housing if I press my palm flat against the crank housing and hold very still. In the North Sea service, the first 3 years, I had used a gauge to read this. The gauge was more accurate. After the 3rd year, I had learned to feel it without the gauge, not because the gauge was wrong, but because the gauge introduced a delay. You looked at it, you registered the reading, you interpreted the reading, and after 3 years I could feel the difference between line noise and hull resonance faster than I could read a gauge. My hands know the difference. It is the difference between static and a signal. It is the difference between the random vibration of a line in a moving medium and the low, slow, purposeful resonance of pressurized metal under stress. You can describe it in frequency terms. Line noise is broadband and aperiodic. Hull resonance is narrowband and periodic, around 60 to 80 cycles, slow enough that you feel it as a pulse rather than a buzz, but describing it does not teach it. It is a thing you know when you know it, and you know it because you have felt it wrong 100 times first. I felt nothing in the first window. 11 minutes of clean line noise. The shear picked back up and the line went from quiet to turbulent in about 40 seconds. I cranked the float up. I waited. The veil rotated. The color did what it does. I sat on the cargo arm platform in my maintenance suit, and I did not think about the 16-hour window, or the power reserves, or the Emperor's office, or the 2 additional tetherprobe packages that Fleet Commander Arath was presumably preparing to deploy into the same conditions that had already eaten 3 attempts. I thought about the vessel. I thought about where it had been and where it was now, and what it was doing in the medium around it. A pressurized hull at 4,200 meters in a gas giant 4th-layer atmosphere is doing something very specific. It is holding. It is maintaining its internal pressure against the external pressure. It is keeping its structure intact against forces that are trying, not with any intention but with every available physical law, to compromise it. In doing that, in resisting, it is producing sound. Very low, very slow, the sound of a thing that is still there. I thought about the 2 ships I had not recovered in the North Sea service. Both of them had been hull failures. In both cases, by the time I deployed the float, the hull had already gone. There was nothing to listen for because there was nothing producing the signal anymore. I had floated above them in the dark water and felt nothing on the line and known what the nothing meant, and that knowledge had a weight to it that I still carry. It is not grief, exactly. It is more like a standing record of the limit of what a method can do. The method can find a hull that is still there. It cannot find one that is not. I did not know whether the Sarath Ven was still there. I knew it had been at 4,100 meters and intact approximately 6 hours ago, based on the last active scan reading before the interference took the signal. I knew that the Vethaal build their research platforms with conservative engineering margins. I knew that the storm rotation cycle at that depth created shear events that were destructive to hull integrity over time, but not instantaneously. I knew that 6 hours was not a long time for a well-built vessel to be at depth, assuming the depth gradient had not worsened significantly since the last reading. I was working on mine. That is where I live in this work. You work in the space between what you know and what you don't, and the instrument in your hand is the thing that shortens the distance. The second window came. I lowered the float. At 7 minutes I felt something. It was faint, a low tremor in the line, very slow. I estimated 65 cycles on the low end of the hull resonance range. Lower than I expected, which told me something. The vessel's internal pressure was lower than its design specification, not because the hull had breached, but because something had lost atmospheric seal, a hatch gasket, a pressure management valve, a ventilation seal under the hull stress. The vessel was breathing out slowly, still intact, still there. Losing pressure slowly, the way a tire loses pressure when the seal is imperfect, not a catastrophic loss, not a blowout, a slow leak, which meant time was shorter than the power reserves alone suggested, but not immediate. The signal was coming from south-southwest of my position. I was feeling it on a line angle I estimated at about 30 degrees below horizontal from the float position. I noted the reading on my wrist log, line angle, tension indicator reading, estimated cycle rate, timestamp. I had 4 minutes left in the window. I locked the crank and pressed both palms flat against the reel housing and held perfectly still and listened with every part of my hands. 65 cycles, slow, steady, quiet. Not desperate machinery in distress sounds desperate, it sounds like something fighting. A hull that is still intact sounds patient. It sounds like something that is simply there and has not decided not to be. That is what I felt, patient, there. Then the window closed and the line went back to noise. I cranked the float up. I pulled out my atmospheric data on my wrist display and did the geometry, the line angle, the float depth, the estimated propagation model for the medium at that depth band, and the physical position of Vethaal Station. It was not complicated mathematics. The float had been in the upper fourth layer at approximately 80 meters below the arm tip. The signal had come in at 30 degrees south-southwest from the float position, triangulating against the known station position, and the float position gave me an estimated vessel location of approximately 2.8 kilometers south-southwest of Vethaal Station, at a depth of around 4,200 meters in the fourth layer. It had drifted south with the storm rotation from its last known position, not far, 200 or 300 meters from where the active scan had lost it. I knew where it was. I called the operations deck. Vethaal answered. I need the cargo arm winch on Bay 4 rated for a long line tether pull, I said. I need to splice a retrieval tether to the winch cable. The bay stores have 30 meters of 3 centimeter braided composite, which is insufficient. I need at least 60 meters of 3 centimeter composite or better, load rated for 400 tons static at the extension I'll need. I also need a position relay from one of the recovery ships at the third layer boundary. I need them positioned above my estimated vessel location and available to acquire an active scanner contact when the vessel clears the interference layer on ascent. There was a very long pause. Supervisor Solis, Set said carefully, are you telling me that you have located the Sarath Ven? I have a position with an uncertainty radius of approximately 200 meters, I said. I would like Fleet Commander Arath to hear this directly rather than secondhand. Can you put me through to him? There was a different kind of pause this time, shorter, 1 moment. The fleet commander came on the line in under a minute, which told me Vethaal had been efficient and the fleet commander had been waiting for something to happen. Supervisor Solis, Fleet Commander Arath said, The duty officer tells me you have a position on the Sareth Ven. A passive resonance position, yes, I said. Approximately 2.8 kilometers south-southwest at 4,200 meters depth. She's drifted south of her last known position, which is consistent with the storm rotation data from my fourth layer monitoring array. The hull is intact and pressurized. She appears to have a slow atmospheric seal loss, internal pressure below spec, but not acutely critical. That changes the timeline calculation somewhat. A brief silence. You can hear the vessel's hull resonance from the cargo arm platform. I can feel it on a passive listen-float line, I said. Yes. The method doesn't use active scanning. The interference field doesn't affect it. Another silence. Longer this time. I understood what was happening in that silence. A person with Fleet Commander Arath's background was running through what I had described, evaluating it, deciding whether it was credible, whether it aligned with principles he understood. He was an engineer, I had read in the station records, before he was an officer. That helped. "I'm coming to the platform," he said. He appeared on the cargo arm platform 12 minutes later. He looked at the reel, he looked at the arm setup, he looked at me. And then he said, "Walk me through the method." I walked him through it, 4 minutes. He was quiet through all of it. He had the quality of stillness that I associate with people who are genuinely good at their work, the ability to receive information without the need to interrupt it or reframe it before it's finished. When I finished, he asked 2 technical questions. Both of them were the right questions to ask. I answered them. Then he said, "What do you need?" That was the moment, I think, when the recovery stopped being my problem alone and became something we were going to solve together. I am precise about this because it matters. He did not take the problem away from me, and he did not simply defer to me. He asked what I needed, and then he got it. The heavy tether cable came from the fleet's emergency stores. A recovery ship positioned itself at the 3rd layer boundary above the estimated ascent path. The operations deck cleared the Bay 4 platform of other traffic and gave me the calm channel I needed. The maintenance depot sent 2 crew to assist with the winch setup, which I directed because they were useful hands, but the setup decisions were mine. We worked in the windows. That is the only way to work in the Veil's 4th layer if you are using passive equipment. You work in the low shear windows, and you hold in the high shear phases, and you do not rush the deployment because rushing produces errors, and errors in this kind of work are not recoverable. Fleet Commander Arath understood that quickly. He had a timeline that made him want to move faster, and he held it anyway because he understood that moving faster would not get the tether to the vessel. It would just produce a tether that had been deployed incorrectly. The first deployment in the 3rd window got me another resonance reading, closer now, the signal slightly stronger, confirming the position drift had been small. I adjusted the arm angle 2 degrees south on the next window and paid out the heavy tether at the marked line angle, 3 meters per window, holding it steady in the shear peak phases, the winch drum turning at a controlled rate, the tension indicator tracking the load. The tether was heavy enough that the arm's load sensor was giving me real-time feedback on the line drag, which was more useful information than the monofilament had given. A heavier line in a denser medium transmits mechanical information more clearly, the way a thick rope gives you more signal than a thread. At 3,800 meters, the tether's tip, which carried a magnetic grapple on a mechanical trigger, met something solid. I felt it in the cable, the way I have always felt it. Not a jerk, a settling. A change in tension that has weight and steadiness to it. Not the erratic pattern of line turbulence, but the specific signature of contact with a fixed object. The tension indicator climbed, steadied, climbed again by a small increment and steadied again. The mechanical trigger engaged with an audible transmission through the cable and the arm. A deep, low thunk that I felt through the deck plating of the platform, the sound of something clasping shut. Fleet Commander Arath was standing 6 meters away. He did not say anything. He looked at me. "She's there," I said. He nodded once. He did not say anything else. He got on his comms channel to the recovery ship at the boundary. I engaged the winch. The load was substantial. The Sareth Ven's hull mass in standard configuration was approximately 400 tons, which was well above the cargo arm winch's rated lifting capacity. But I was not lifting the vessel. I was pulling it laterally first, out of the storm floor shear pocket where it had settled, and then providing controlled guidance on its ascent angle. The fourth layer at that depth has substantial buoyancy. The vessel, once displaced from the shear pocket and given an upward angle, would begin to rise under its own buoyancy, the way a bubble rises in a jar of thick liquid, slow and steady and purposeful. The winch's job was to manage the angle and keep the vessel from drifting laterally back into the shear pocket during the ascent. It was a tension job, not a lift job. The winch was rated for it. The recovery ship above relayed the tether angle to me through the arm's telemetry, which I had linked to the operations deck display, so Fleet Commander Arath could follow the geometry from the platform's secondary screen. Every low shear window I made a small adjustment, a degree here, half a degree there, compensating for the storm rotation drift that my model predicted. The model was good, not perfect. A propagation model built on 9 years of external observation data from a maintenance array was not the same as a model built on in-layer instrumentation, and I knew that, and I compensated by reading the tension indicator and the tether angle data and adjusting empirically. You work the instrument you have. You work what the instrument tells you. You do not pretend the instrument is something it isn't. Fleet Commander Arath stood on the platform for all 4 hours of the ascent. He did not manage me. He answered questions when I asked them, and he got things when I needed them, and he stayed out of my field of view when I was reading the tension indicator. He had brought a coffee unit from somewhere, and at some point during the 3rd hour, he put a cup on the equipment shelf to my right without saying anything, which I found, in the context of 4 hours of tension work, unexpectedly considerate. At hour 3 and 40 minutes, the recovery ship's commander came on the comms channel. Fleet Commander, active scanner acquisition confirmed. 3rd layer, approximately 800 meters depth. The vessel is ascending on tether guidance. Initial hull integrity scan, the hull reads intact. I'm seeing a pressure seal variance on the aft section, consistent with a minor seal failure non-critical. Crew life sign scan, all 12 crew signs confirmed. Fleet Commander Arath looked at me. I was watching the tension indicator. The needle was steady in the range I expected for an ascending hull at that depth. I did not need to look at it. I knew what it was reading, but I was watching it anyway because that is what you do at the end of depth work. You watch the instrument until the thing is up. "Supervisor Solis," he said, "well done." "Not yet," I said. "Wait until she's in the cradle." She came in 43 minutes later. The lower docking cradle's environmental seal engaged with the solid specific sound that meant a good lock, which I had heard at that cradle several hundred times and which sounded different when it mattered. The station's atmosphere filled the lock. The pressure equalization cycle ran its standard 11 minutes. Then the hatch indicators on the operations deck display went from red to green, and 63 minutes after that, I know because I was watching the clock, the Sareth Ven's primary hatch opened. I did not go to the cradle. That was not my job. My job was on the cargo arm platform, which needed a post-deployment inspection before it was returned to cargo operations. I started the inspection. The arm had performed well, no anomalous load readings during the recovery, no articulation issues. The 3rd joint hesitation I had been noting in my maintenance logs had not manifested during the operation. The winch drum showed cable tension, marking consistent with the load it had taken. I logged all of it and tagged the cable for replacement in the next maintenance cycle. Governor Riln came to the platform 45 minutes later. He stood at the entrance with the expression of a man who had been through something he was still processing. "Supervisor Solis," he said, "the fleet commander will be filing a recovery report. He has asked me to confirm your preference regarding documentation." "My preference is what I told you," I said. The fleet commander's recovery operation located and retrieved the vessel using fourth-layer atmospheric monitoring data from the station's maintenance array and a cargo arm winch tether assist. That is accurate and complete. "He wants to document the passive resonance method," the governor said. "The method can go in a technical addendum to the atmospheric monitoring notes," I said. "It should be there. Someone might need it." He was quiet for a moment. "You are declining a formal commendation." "Yes," I said. "May I ask why?" I thought about it for a moment. The honest answer had several layers. The first layer was simple. I had done a thing I was trained to do with equipment I had maintained for 11 years, and I did not think that was commendation-worthy in the way formal commendations are designed to mark things. The second layer was less simple. In my experience, formal commendations for unusual acts performed by people in low-status roles tend to operate as a kind of administrative resolution. The commendation files the unusual thing, closes it, moves it into the category of recognized and done, which was the exact category I did not want the passive resonance method to end up in, because I wanted it to be documented as a method, not as a personal achievement. A commendation is about the person. I wanted the record to be about the tool. "I'd rather the method was documented than my name," I said. "Someone else will need it eventually." He looked at me for a long time, then he nodded and left. The Sarath Ven's crew was in the medical bay for 3 days. Standard pressure exposure protocol, which for humans involves a decompression observation period and blood gas monitoring, and for Vethaal involves a different but parallel set of procedures that I did not know the details of. The vessel itself was in the lower cradle undergoing systems assessment and hull inspection. The aft seal that the recovery ship's scanner had flagged was repaired by the second day. A gasket on an atmospheric management valve, which had apparently cracked under the sustained pressure variation of 4 days at depth. Not a dramatic failure. The kind of failure that happens to hardware that is asked to do more than it was designed for over a longer period than intended. On the morning of the 4th day, I was in Bay 4 doing the scheduled post-recovery inspection of the lower cradle docking seals. The seals had taken some additional load during the Sarath Ven's docking, and I wanted to assess whether any of them showed wear beyond the normal tolerance. I was on my back under the left side cradle arm with an inspection light when I heard footsteps in the bay entrance. I did not look up immediately. Bay 4 is a working bay and people come through it. I finished the sight line I was checking, made a note on my wrist log, and then slid out from under the cradle arm and looked. She was standing at the bay entrance in plain research staff clothes, a gray tunic, dark trousers, a transit bag over one shoulder. No insignia. Nothing that would mark her to a stranger as anything except a scientist on her way to a transfer shuttle. She was Vethaal in the specific way of Vethaal who have spent significant time in field work. There was a quality to her stillness that was not administrative stillness or aristocratic stillness, but the stillness of someone who has spent a lot of time in environments where stillness is practical, where moving for the sake of moving is wasteful and staying still while you observe is the correct first action. She was looking at the cargo arm platform access hatch, then at the winch drum, which I had tagged for cable replacement but had not yet swapped, then at me. "You are Supervisor Solis," she said, "not a question." "Yes," I said. I was aware that there was grease on my hands from the cradle arm and that I probably had some of it on my face as well, which is the kind of thing you stop caring about after about 15 years of this kind of work. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the winch drum again. I could see her reading what was there. The cable tension markings on the drum, the angle of the arm, the clamp bracket where the reel had been mounted. She was reading the room the way someone reads a room when they know what happened in it, and they are trying to understand how it was done. She looked like a scientist, which I suppose was because she was one. Then she looked back at me. "Briasales," she said. "Just my name." Quietly. The way you say a name when you have been thinking about it for 3 days and have arrived at something you want to say in front of it, and the something you want to say is too large for words and you know it, and so you say the name instead because the name is at least precise. I have heard that tone twice before in my working life, once from Paul Wares from the North Sea, once from the trawler captain whose boat I had steadied in a sea that wanted to take it. Both times, the person had said my name that way and then stayed quiet for a moment, and I had stayed quiet too, because there was not anything to add to it. The tone was complete in itself. It did not need a response, and offering one would have been wrong. The way finishing someone else's sentence is wrong when the sentence is the right length already. "Yes," I said. She nodded once. She looked at the bay a moment longer, at the winch, at the arm, at the platform hatch. Then she turned and walked out. 3 hours later her transfer shuttle departed Vethaal station. I watched it go from the Bay 4 observation port, not deliberately, but because the port faces the departure lanes, and I was standing near it when the shuttle's running lights came on. It moved away from the station in the standard departure arc, smooth and unhurried, the way a well-maintained shuttle moves when the pilot is good and the systems are nominal. Below it, behind it, the veil turned in its rotation, and the veil tone color was very deep that afternoon, the bruised purple of depth and pressure, and the particular light that exists where there is no ordinary light. The shuttle passed through the atmospheric boundary, and the veil closed under it like water closing under a diver's feet, and I watched until the running lights were past the transit point and gone. Then I went back to the cradle seal inspection. The left side seal on the number 3 lower cradle docking point showed wear along the upper lip, not critical, not immediate, but worth noting. I documented it, flagged the seal for replacement in the next maintenance cycle, and sent the inspection report to Governor Rilne's office with a note recommending the replacement be scheduled before the next heavy tonnage docking. Then I logged the cargo arm inspection results, filed the winch cable stress assessment, confirmed the cable replacement requisition, and noted in my personal equipment log that the passive resonance float had been returned to the canvas case, inspected, and replaced in the locker. At end of shift, I locked the bay and went to the commissary and got a coffee. I sat in the corner table by the window that looks out over the upper vale. The storm was in its rotation. The purple was very deep. I have sat at this table most evenings for 11 years, and I have never gotten tired of looking at it, which surprises some people and does not surprise me at all, because the things that do not get ordinary after a long time are the things that are genuinely large, and the veil is genuinely large. Set Vayorn came in while I was finishing the coffee. He got a drink from the counter, and then he came to my table, which he had never done before, and he said, "The fleet commander submitted the recovery report this afternoon." "I know," I said. "He put your atmospheric monitoring data in the official Veil survey record," Set said. "Your name is in the data headers." "I know that too," I said. "He told me he was going to." Set was quiet for a moment. He looked at the veil through the window. Then he said, "The passive resonance method, is it in the addendum?" "In the technical notes," I said, "with the float specifications and the deployment geometry and the propagation model, enough for someone to replicate it." He nodded. He was still looking at the veil. "I didn't know that method existed," he said. "Most people don't," I said. "It's a dive recovery technique. It's not in Vethaal atmospheric retrieval literature because the Vethaal don't dive." I paused. "They will now, probably. Or they'll build an automated version, which will be more accurate and less dependent on someone having the right equipment in their locker." "But you had it," he said. "I had it," I said. He looked at me. He had the expression of a young man who has had a category revised and is not quite sure where to file the revised version. I recognized the expression. I had seen it on the faces of a number of people over the years, at the moments when the frame they had for me turned out to be incomplete. "Good night, Set," I said. "Good night, Supervisor Solis," he said. I finished my coffee, washed the cup, and went home. The maintenance depot sent the number 3 cradle gasket 6 days later. I installed it on a Wednesday morning, which took about 40 minutes with a standard seal tool and the correct torque settings, and tested the seal and wrote it up in the bay log. Bay 4's monthly inspection was clean. The comm relay's grounding fault was still present. I filed another repair request. The handrail is back in my locker, third shelf from the left canvas case beside the spare relay parts. I checked it last Monday on the regular monthly inspection. The monofilament is sound. The film is intact. The tension indicator reads true. It is ready to go, the way I keep everything that is ready to go, which is carefully and without expectation, because the only useful way to keep equipment is to keep it as if you might need it today and not know it yet. 9 years of atmospheric data is a long time to watch something. I had watched the veil for 9 years before any of it was needed. It had been needed once. I do not know if it will be needed again. What I know is that it is in the record now, in the Vethaal Imperial Atmospheric Survey database with my name in the header, and the passive resonance method is in the technical notes, and the next person who looks down into the veil and wonders what is down there and how to find it will have a starting point that they did not have before. That seems like enough. There is a memorial plaque in the administrative corridor with the names of the ships the veil has taken over 300 years. I walk past it every morning on my way to Bay 4. The Sareth Ven is not on it. It is in its cradle in the lower bay, its aft seal replaced and its systems recertified, waiting for its next survey rotation. The crew is back on duty. The atmospheric mapping project has been updated to include 4th layer boundary data from the station's maintenance monitoring array. Bay 4's fuel line was repaired the same day the Sareth Ven came up. The replacement seal took about 2 hours and came from stores I had flagged in my last maintenance report, the one the contractor had placed on the low priority schedule. After the recovery, for reasons I was not fully informed about but could guess at, the contractor's low priority schedule developed an unexpected interest in Bay 4's maintenance backlog. 3 outstanding requisitions were filled inside the week, including the comm relay grounding fault, which a crew repaired on a Thursday morning without a service call. The Bay comm no longer bleeds the fleet coordination channel into my speaker. I find I do not miss it. The handrail is back in my locker, third shelf canvas case beside the spare relay parts, ready to go. I keep everything that way, carefully, without expectation, because the only useful way to keep equipment is to keep it as if you might need it today and not know it yet. And on the cargo arm platform, when I go out to log the morning atmospheric readings, the data still worth having, the veil still down there, I can hear it the way I have always heard it, not with instruments, just by standing at the edge and paying attention. That is all this work has ever asked of me. Pay attention, carry what you know, be there when it matters. The rest takes care of itself.